let's talk about Ukraine. Obviously, that's still important. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. So Severodonetsk, that major standpoint where between Ukraine and Russia, really on the front line, has finally fallen to the Russians after probably the war's bloodiest fight so far. I mean, thousands and thousands of casualties on both sides. We don't know the exact number because they're not being really released, but the Ukrainians are saying that they were carrying out a, quote, tactical regrouping by pulling its forces out of the city. And really what you're seeing here is a victory for Russian-style war of attrition. They have bombarded the city, almost leveled it, really, with artillery, and they're moving artillery forward. They have several more supplies than the Ukrainians. They've changed up their own supply lines, and they seem committed very much to this strategy, which is just a long and a blinding war of attrition, moving the front line back and back and back. And we have to be honest here, you know, given even with all of the weapons that we've shipped to Ukraine, the manpower even that they've been able to draw on, they just have an inferior force in the face of this this level of armament that the Russians have. You know, one of the things we had to emphasize is that, yes, the Russians embarrassed themselves by not being able to take Kyiv and really showing the world that they're not a first-class military, but that doesn't mean they're a third-class military either. And when you're a second-class military with nuclear weapons, you're still something to be reckoned with, and you still can win, you know, some military tactical victories on the battlefield. So I think this is noteworthy in terms of how it's going to impact the ongoing discussions right now between the G7 leaders who have decided to push some more sanctions on Russia. At the same time, the Russians making a big show of things in response to the G7 summit. Let's put this up there on the screen. They went ahead and struck what they claim are Western-supplied tanks in some Kyiv airstrikes. So the airstrikes were very much meant to rock the world. Kyiv had not been under the similar level of bombardment as in the early days of the war for quite some time. And I think it is just a show of force in order to show the West, like, hey, we still have this capability. We can do it anytime we want. We don't care about the ramifications. Screw you, screw your sanctions. And if you continue to ship arms here, we're going to bomb the hell out of them. And that hasn't necessarily changed any of the calculus currently among the G7 and really amongst the West. Because if you consider the story that we're about to show you in this context, as we have always warned, which is that as the public loses interest and as wars go on, the amount of things that can go wrong and the changes in what's happening on the ground that we don't sign off on and which can escalate in the gray war, which could come back to bite us, are significant. So let's throw this up there. Now, the New York Times now reporting that a secretive operation involving U.S. Special Operations Forces, CIA assets, and other NATO troops inside of Ukraine is not just continuing, but is coordinating the flow of weapons. So what they say, and again, you have to take this all with a grain of salt, who knows how much it is true, is that CIA personnel remain on the ground in Ukraine, specifically in Kyiv, directing most of the intelligence that the U.S. is sharing with the Ukrainians, which they use to take out some Russian assets, kill some Russian generals, but also other NATO special operations forces. I think that is the most noteworthy one to me, which is, yeah, there aren't U.S. troops there. As we always remind you, we have an Article 5 treaty with all of these countries. So what happens I'm going to read off the countries that have special operations inside: Britain, France, Canada, and Lithuania. So we have 4 NATO allies who have troops on the ground in Ukraine. What happens if one of those guys gets killed? I mean, we really nobody knows the answer to that question. I was always worried about this when we had special operations guys on the ground in Syria. And I was like, man, what if a Russian airstrike kills one of these guys? Like, what is going to happen? Yeah. People don't remember. Turkey actually shot down a Russian jet in 2015, which shocked the whole world. And, you know, thankfully there was some diplomacy between Erdogan and Putin, and everything worked out. But, you know, Turkey's also in NATO, so you had a NATO force shoot down a Russian plane. These are all things that can happen on the margins of the gray war. So one of these guys gets killed, it could be an escalation on our part. And look, these things are not ending anytime soon. That's the point that we're making by starting with the fall of Severodonetsk, is because the front line, yes, has been pushed back, but there are still months, possibly years left just fighting over in the eastern Donbas as we are shipping even more weapons. As of this morning, We learned the G7 and the United States, of course, specifically, will be bankrolling and buying some medium and long-range missiles on behalf of the Ukrainians. I'm not sure what the other G7 economies are doing, by the way. Last time I checked, the whole point of the G7 is you have the world's largest economies that are all getting together. Why can't they buy them? That's a great question that somebody should ask them. But we are providing them billions of dollars of even more weapons, more artillery towards the front line, and it's going to continue in coordination with NATO, with having our guys there, and not just our guys, but our allies. And if they get into a scrap, I think, as we have now shown the world, we will bear the significant cost and brunt of this military action, as usual, for this region.
Listen, there's a lot to say about this, but if there was any doubt remaining in your mind that this was a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, I think the CIA operatives on the ground tell you everything you need to know. And we've been trying to, because these little accounts appear in the press. And the funny thing is, the people who are leaking this, they're bragging about it.
Yeah, of course they are.
They think the American public are going to be like, that's great that there's CIA operatives on the ground. I'm sure there is a large percentage of the American public who probably does feel that way. But you get these little glimpses where they admit they've done offensive cyber attacks, where they admit just how much they're coordinating the intelligence and how responsible they were for some of the top targeting in terms of killing Russian generals, taking out that
ship, Moskva.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're learning even more about just how in we are. And so I want you to keep that in mind when Biden says things about how, like, oh, we just want to support whatever the Ukrainians want. No, we're driving this train. There is no doubt about it. This is a proxy war between the U.S. and Russia, and it is an extremely dangerous game that we are playing here along with our NATO allies. I think the battle update here with regards to Severodonetsk is also incredibly important, because Russia has learned. Their initial strategy of like the lightning strikes and going into Kyiv and all that didn't work out. They've adjusted, and now they've landed on something that is working very well. They are, the article that we had up there before says this is likely to be seen by Russia as vindication for its switch from its early failed attempt at lightning warfare to a relentless grinding offensive using massive artillery in the east. Also, the strikes that Russia launched at not only Kyiv, but other parts of the country that hadn't been hit recently, these should be seen as a response to not only the G7 summit, but also to the U.S. delivering those longer range rockets. Remember, when we said we were going to do that, Putin told state television they would hit fresh targets in Ukraine if we followed through with it. Here's the quote: if such missiles were supplied, quote, we will strike at those targets which we have not yet been hitting, said Putin, who's believed to be closely involved in military decision-making. He did not specify exactly what, although logistics points would be amongst the most logical targets, and that is exactly what they are saying anyway that they hit. The Ukrainians are saying that they were something different. So keep in mind, when we act, when we escalate, Russia has options as well. And so we keep playing this extremely dangerous game and seemingly no end in sight here. Cable news is ripping us apart, dividing the country, making it impossible to function as a society, and making it impossible to know just what is true and what is false. But the good news is they are failing and they know it.
That is why we're building something new, a new mainstream, a healthier one, something more trustworthy, something that we are going to need in one of the most pivotal times in American history. We are building up here for the midterms, for the upcoming presidential election, but we need your help. So if you can help us out by becoming a premium member today at breakingpoints.com, we're trying to change America for the better and the entire world.
So what are you waiting for, guys? Go to breakingpoints.com and sign up and help us build a new mainstream.